Filling the SBIR Gap panel discussion.
Hello and welcome this morning. I would like to kick off our Filling the SBIR Gap panel. My name is Nikki Krebs and I am the Deputy Chief Operating Officer at Wright Brothers Institute. I'm excited to be your moderator today to discuss some of the ways businesses like yours can have greater success with the SBIR process. So first, I'd like to introduce our panelists to you. Please give a wave for each of our viewers as I go around. First, we have Brian Bullerman from Treble One Aerospace, whose mission is to help aerospace and defense companies apply their products and technologies to solve difficult USAF problems, creating the partnerships and stakeholder alignment necessary for program success. Next, we have Billy Grill, the procurement counselor for Ohio University's Procurement Technical Assistance Center, that provides free technical assistance to businesses desiring to enter local, state, and federal government markets as a means to support economic development and to foster the retention and creation of small business jobs. Hey, Billy. Finally, last but not least, please welcome Lauren Tiffin from the Entrepreneur Center, a commercialization hub in Dayton, Ohio that serves both local small businesses and entrepreneurs as an ESP, but also nationally with our commercialization training programs. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us this morning. I'm excited about our topic, so let's dive straight into what it means to fill the SBIR gap. To begin, first, let's talk about the SBIR procurement process. It can be daunting. Brian, how do you and Treble One educate your clients about this process? And can you tell us how this impacts the SBIR ecosystem?
Yeah, thanks, Nikki. Hello, everyone. Brian Bullerman from Treble One Aerospace. The Air Force procurement system or acquisition system is pretty large and complex. And so for industry members that might be new to working with the government or just starting out, it could be really intimidating. So what we do with our clients is do a lot of education and sort of hands-on support and planning to help them, plan through and work through migrating from research and development stage to kind of product and procurement stage. So I'll go into a few slides as to kind of what that looks like. But one of the key things I think for companies to understand, as well as their government counterparts, is really how the Air Force procurement system works and how it's sort of organized. And so a lot of times companies enter, sort of on the left with the research labs or the research community, and they have certain focus areas and things that they care about. But then as you migrate towards the Air Force centers, so lifecycle management centers, sustainment centers, test centers, they care about different things. Now they're starting to look at things like systems integration and engineering, validation and certification. Is that product or is that capability mature enough and safe enough for use? And then you go to the end users who actually set the requirements, provide the funding, and they care about other things as well. They care about the operational benefit to them. Is it affordable? Is it durable? Is it supportable and sustainable? So each one of those actors in this sort of play have different roles and things that they care about, and understanding who those people are, how they work together and fit together is extremely critical. Some of the things that we come across and we focus on a lot is really a sound development planning. So both in the phase 1, phase 2, and then getting into the phase 3 stages. And so beyond just the technology, there's so much more that goes into actually developing a product and taking it to market, as many companies know in the industry space. And so the Air Force has a lot of regulatory airworthiness and certification requirements. They have different mission requirements that might take a level of ruggedness or quality beyond what maybe a commercial application might entail. So understanding that's very important, and actually planning through what it's really going to take that product to market with the military is critical. So just a few things here on this chart. Obviously identifying who those key stakeholders are across those different domains: research, procurement, and operations. Industry partners, prime contractors, manufacturing partners, distribution partners, consultants. What's the overall product concept? So a lot of times companies will come in with a technology that is very promising and raw, but how that gets instantiated into a specific product and how that product is manufactured, sold, implemented, and supported usually takes a lot more detail than is typically done up front. And then how we're going to demonstrate that for the warfighting customer, how do you mature it and qualify it, and eventually then sell it, i.e. go into phase 3. So all those things are very important. It takes a lot of planning, and we work with companies to do that. And the final thing I'll kind of say is when you get into phase 3, it's more than just a contract. So in SBIR land, we talk a lot about the phase 3 contract, but really it's It's an end state where the company is selling that product or that service into the DoD. And so if you look at sort of the diagram on the right hand side, there's a lot of things that go into making that happen. So there's obviously, the customer and their requirement. Does the technology meet it? Getting to a demonstration and validation phase, the business case, why is it important to the Air Force? What benefit does it derive? The contract vehicle, the funding, et cetera. But as we've gone through this over the last 20 years, what we find over and over again is there's 4 key reasons that programs fail. You can sort of read them on your own. I would say the last 2 are the most important and the most common. Everybody talks about not having funding to get to phase 3 and the valley of death, but really what it comes down to is good sound planning and leadership. So to have an end user organization like a PEO want to invest, we have to satisfy all those things on the right. Otherwise, for them, it's an incomplete package, an incomplete story. So I'll kind of stop there, but in a nutshell, if I had to foot stomp one thing, it would be detailed planning throughout the product lifecycle is absolutely critical. You have to know what the activities are, the costs are, and the outcomes to put together a credible story and business case.
Thanks, Brian. That's really great insight there, and I appreciate the diagrams. Lauren, from your perspective, can you tell us what the Entrepreneur Center does and how you help educate companies?
Absolutely, Nikki. Thank you. And thanks, Brian. It's an awesome overview. So the Entrepreneur Center is in Dayton, but we service companies across the country, hundreds of companies when they're trying to figure out what their commercialization path is. So we do these trainings, these commercialization assistance programs or services that we get to offer small businesses. So whether that's a 3-day kind of boot camp that we run companies through, or it's a much more intense 10-week program where we're becoming intimately knowledgeable of these technologies and these businesses, we get to walk that path with the companies. And one thing that I love that we get to do is take a really personal approach. We get to know these founders. We really care about small businesses and the founders behind them, and help them understand what their unique commercialization path is, because there's no one size fits all. So with all of these training programs, what we are trying to do is fill the SBIR gap per the name of this session, right? Find ways to teach entrepreneurs and small business owners how they themselves can fill the funding gap, the resource gap, the planning gap, or the knowledge gap, to help them go from knowing nothing to a phase 1 to a phase 2, and then hopefully and ideally to a phase 3 or some sort of contract stage with that small business and their ideal customer.
Thanks for sharing that, Lauren. I know that is helpful information for our audience here today. So I guess what I'm going into next is academia also plays a role in educating SBIR companies. Billy, how does OU assist with the SBIR process?
Sure. With the OU PTAC, we're actually part of a much broader network of not just Ohio PTACs, but also the nationwide PTACs. We're much more of a jack of all trades in that respect. But when it comes to educating both traditional and non-traditional companies, we tend to focus on the process, right? So getting your registrations in order before submission, preparation for submission, starting early enough in the timeline to where you're not putting out multiple fires at the last minute, and really focusing on that BMP effort throughout the first phase of the SBIR process to educate these companies on, okay, what's the protocol? How do you submit to a SBIR, and how do you then plan going forward? So we have a much wider breadth of support, but at the same time, we also focus on all the different resource partners that come into play throughout the SBIR process, and making sure we connect our clients with those resources that can give that more detailed and in-depth help.
That's great, Billy. Thank you so much for that feedback. So there's a big difference between a SBIR phase 1 and a phase 3. Brian, I know you touched on a little bit on this earlier, but what should companies do at the beginning of their SBIR journey to position themselves for future awards?
Yeah, thanks, Nikki. Yeah, I think the biggest thing that companies can do to help themselves is really focus on what I would call deep market research. And so, um, whatever your product domain is, let's say you're taking a technology for UAVs. You know, you have a new sensor for UAVs. Well, really understanding all the existing and incumbent products out there, all the platforms that you might integrate with, all those end users, and then not just for the Air Force, but for the Navy, for the Army, and even commercial industry, and having such a depth of understanding to know where the real pain points are, what the price points are, and sort of those capability gaps. A lot of times we see companies coming at the phase one stage with an idea and a somewhat abstract or vague idea of how their technology can provide a benefit. But what they often lack is a really specific understanding of really what the pain point is for the current solution and what the price that customer is paying and how it's used and all those things. And so, and this is where we go back into the planning piece. The detailed market research in and of itself will identify those pain points, will help then formulate that development plan for that product because you'll understand what's really needed in the market, so to speak, and you'll start to put together an understanding of the key customers and stakeholders and partners that you might need to also be successful and competitors. Again, we come into, in many cases, phase one companies that come in and they may have a vague understanding of some of their competitors, but not really in a sufficient manner to differentiate themselves. So if I had, again, on this subject, the depth of market research is critical to understand what they're getting into and what it's really going to take and how they can, more importantly, differentiate themselves and partner up to be successful.
That's great, Brian. That's really helpful insight. Billy, what are the biggest barriers at the early stages of the SBIR process?
Oh, there's many. Yeah, it comes down to knowing the language, knowing the protocol, knowing the process, being prepared for those differences, from client to client. There's many barriers, but at the same time, if you flip that on its head, there's so many different resources throughout the SBIR programs now, whether it's I-Core or the TABA funding that we spoke about last week. There's a lot of momentum behind the program, and there's a lot of different different people that want to help you and see you succeed throughout the process. So yes, up front, it is intimidating to submit to a government proposal like a SBIR grant fund, but at the same time, with the help from the PTAC, helping you with your registrations, helping you with your bid and proposal process, helping you build rates and things of that nature. And then on Brian's end, Lauren's end, on the commercialization front, there's a ton of different resource to help you through those different barriers as well. So I think it's a really good environment.
It's really great perspective there, Billy. I appreciate that. Lauren, are you seeing similar struggles with the cohorts you work with as they try to break the defense market or break into the defense market?
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like I'm almost going to be repeating some things that Brian and Billy have said, but like it's because they're awesome and they're good at what they do. And I work with them for a reason. So I think the biggest thing that I see across the board when I work with cohorts, whether it's short engagements or it's long ones, is something Brian mentioned around market research. I think the biggest thing is the customer discovery piece in general. So we're talking, like he said, identifying the pain points and truly understanding your customer, and that person, you can't just claim that the Air Force is your customer. Like there's a decision maker in there. There's an end user in there. There's someone who funds you in there. And you really have to drill down and identify who that specific person or branch or squadron or program of record, like find exactly who that is that you want to work with. And so customer discovery, I think, is the key there, because without a good product market fit, you're not going to see much success, even when you're trying to write a proposal. You have to paint that picture very deliberately and purposefully. And I think that, it's the same kind of work you would do on the commercial side. And so it's expected that you should do that on the defense side too. Goes back to the whole dual use point, right? Is that if you're going to go do customer discovery before you approach So you are a consumer product and you're going to go approach P&G, like you would do a ton of research of who your end users are. You would do interviews, you would really get to know your customer, and you got to do that on the defense side too. It's harder, but it's the same kind of work. And to the extent that you would prep certain things, like on the commercial side, you might have an elevator pitch or a quick blurb, right? On the military side, you'll have that too. It just might be called something different. It might be your bluff statement, right? You might have like a one-page summary of your technology that you'd float to a VC or a potential partner or customer on the commercial side. And on the defense side, it's the same thing. You might just have a quad chart. So understanding all those pieces and how they play into your customer discovery process, identifying that customer, understanding them, profiling them, and then accessing them and talking to them or pitching to them. It's hard work, but it's really important. And that's, I think, the biggest thing that we push people towards when we train with them across the board.
Lauren, that's great. I think you guys have all honed in on customer and planning, and it's reiterating the importance of finding out who your market is and your customer is. So that's great. So we're going to switch gears a little bit. Brian, let's talk about strategic partnerships. Whether we are talking about DoD partners or investors, it is important to identify how you can advance your technology or product. Brian, what kind of partnerships are critical for phase 3 applicants?
Yeah, thanks, Nikki. You kind of mentioned one. I'll leave sort of the investment answer for Lauren or Billy, because that's not our area of expertise. They're much smarter than we are on that. Kind of within the DoD ecosystem, a lot of people talk about, and there's been a lot of efforts to partner companies up with, let's say, prime contractors. There's a mentor protege program. There's obviously a lot of the primes, OEMs, Boeing, Lockheed, Northrop, et cetera, involved in SBIR. But I think an area that's kind of underutilized or underlooked is a lot of the, I'll call it tier 1, 2, and 3 suppliers. And so understanding who provides subsystems, critical subsystems, whether it's composite aircraft structures or sensors or radar or landing gear, whatever it might be, to the platforms is maybe an easier point of entry. And those companies often already have existing supplier relationships and strategic or supplier relationships with those primes. So instead of trying to reinvent the wheel and stand up your own manufacturing line or develop your own, supplier vendor relationship with a prime, it might be easier, at least at the outset, to partner with somebody. The other thing I might say is that I can't overemphasize enough the importance of mentors and consultants in this business. And I'm not plugging ourselves. What I mean is more strategic industry consultants. So, for example, if you're in the metal casting industry and you're trying to bring some new technology to market for turbine engine castings and things, it might be smart to actually find someone who's recently retired in that industry, who worked for some of the large casting vendors or one of the prime contractors, either as a strategic hire or as a consultant. And I've seen a lot of companies be very successful doing that, because those folks, they already have all the connections. They already know, what it's really going to take and what the shortcomings are and how the technology should be differentiated and priced and those kind of things. So when I look at a company that's doing a phase 1 SBIR budgets now are tighter, but if I look at a phase 2 budget, if the company comes to me and they have virtually no subcontractors and they're basically keeping all the money for themselves, then I can pretty instantly tell that they're gonna have a hard time, right? So being willing to take that phase 2 budget and identify key people that can help you and you can hire for that expertise is critical. I think some of the best startups in industry, they hire out for expertise. But I think from the SBIR perspective, more companies should do the same. There's a lot of smart mentors and consultants out there that can help you in your product domain, as well as inside the DoD. There's a lot of mentors within AFRL or other organizations that would be very willing to give their time and expertise if you just bother to ask and seek it out. So,
thanks, Brian. In the same vein, I imagine that strategic partners look different for phase 1 and phase 2 partners, which Brian's touched on a little bit. Billy, how do you see them being different?
Oh, most certainly. It's great. It's really fun to watch your clients mature through this process and watch their network mature through this process. Up front at the very beginning, their help is much more general that they need. They come to you and they say, we need help with, everything, which is perfect. That really is where the PTAC comes in. But as they progress through the different phases and challenges, of the the SBIR program, their help is much more specific. It does become more geared towards commercialization, towards tackling much more complex issues such as IP, different teaming situations that they may need to investigate, and that's where you start maturing their network with them. Which is really, it's something fun that I really enjoy doing with my clients, where they start speaking the acronym soup eventually, down the line a little bit that we all take for granted on a daily basis. And then they start needing much more advanced support, whether it is an IP specialist or whether it is a deep dive into that, that market research, who's buying what I'm selling. So it really does mature as they go throughout the process. And the good thing is we do have resource partners for each part of that maturation process to be able to support. Even if we can't provide that support, we know somebody who can. And it's just really great to see that progress in our clients.
That's great. Thanks, Billy. Lauren, how about you? How do you introduce your accelerator participants to strategic partners? Are there collaboration events or demonstrations that help build these networks?
Yeah, Nikki, I would love to say that we have the biggest, broadest network you've ever seen, and we can make direct introductions to everyone's ideal strategic partner for them. But that's just not the case. I do think that there's something to be said about having a direct introduction to someone, or a warm introduction to a strategic partner or to an individual that you want to pursue. And there's this element of hustling, right? Of network. Like, put yourself out there and go find the people who can introduce you to the right folks. You're entrepreneurs, those of you listening, right? Like, there's an element of hustle that you have in your bones if you're into this kind of thing. And so kind of igniting that and using it to go find the way to get in touch with the right people. Now, where we have contacts, we're so happy to introduce people to strategic partners that we think align with them and with what they're trying to do. But there is that element of hustling. And I think it goes without saying of like, put yourself where your customers will find you, or put yourself where your strategic partners will find you. If they're hosting any event, sign up for it. If they're super active on LinkedIn, engage with every single post. If they have a forum on their website, or if they have a blog, I don't know, like, go figure out who that strategic partner is, figure out where they are, where they have activity, events that they're hosting, and go be a part of every single one of them. There's that fine line of being aggressive and being annoying. And so you want to be aggressive and you want to put yourself out there, because we need your voice, we need your innovation. And so you need it to be heard. You need to find the right partners to help you get to that point where you can actually deploy and bring this thing to life. But there is that element of like, put yourself wherever they're going to find you, and be aggressive about making sure that you get their attention.
That's great feedback, Lauren. Thank you. So based on all of your experiences with the Air Force or the Air Force customers, what can the Air Force do to help these companies, individuals, find success? Brian, I'm going to turn to you first on this one.
Okay, yeah. I think the biggest thing that the Air Force can do to help small businesses and in turn help themselves is to be accessible and to communicate. Hosting or co-hosting with partners like Wright Brothers Institute and Tech and others, Colliders, Industry Day events, virtual or otherwise, is critical. Making sure that small businesses can engage and access them, and that there's a good two-way communication. I mean, if you think about it, if the Air Force isn't able and willing to communicate their problems and how small business can work with them and support them that way, then how do we as a nation expect small business to solve those problems if they don't know A, what they are, and B, how to connect with the government to solve them? So the government has to be going forward more open, and they've made great strides in the last 5 years, just tremendous strides. But yeah, just sharing information. I think the second thing is that the government has to be willing to lean forward a little bit. So we work a lot with the AFWorks Spark organizations, and one thing that we hammer to those folks is you have to plan for success. So if a company that you want to have demonstrate a capability and eventually buy, if you think that there's promise there, then on day one of the phase 2 program, I think the government needs to start planning internally. What does success look like? And if this technology is successful, what do we have to have lined up in terms of resources? So budgets, contract vehicles, requirements, and other types of things to help enable that company to be successful. Like what I see a lot of is there's a lot of expectations and work really placed on the back of small businesses, and they're just not experienced enough or equipped enough in many cases to do that. So the government has to be there, pulling on the other end and almost, assuming that technology will be successful. And if it is, we're now pre-positioned and prepared to move forward with it versus waiting until the test data comes in to then start that process. When the program's almost over, then all of a sudden that just creates huge gaps in what we call the valley of death. So
I agree. Be prepared to handle that success. So that's great. Billy, how are your experiences? The same, different? Thoughts?
No, we have a really good working relationship with small business offices and the different resources at base and across different agencies. And a lot of times it's hard to keep up with the ever-changing landscape of resources. And I think the best way that the Air Force specifically can help their clients is to be aware of what resources are available to them and able to not take the brunt of that on themselves and really enable them to grow and succeed as not just the technology, but a business as a whole.
I hear you. Lauren, how has your experience been?
Yeah, I think you're going to sense a trend here. Seriously, it's going to sound like the same, but I mean, the access and the availability to the Air Force. PTACs are awesome. Tech Scouts are awesome. Collider events where actual PMs show up and can spend one-on-one time with you are awesome. We just need more of them and access to them. And I don't know what that looks like of making them more available, making more of them and whatnot. But I think it's just the availability and the access points to get that peek behind the curtain into the corporate Air Force, right? Like there's that element there of saying, where do I start? Like if I'm just trying to break into this market, like where do I start? So there's that. But I think something else that the Air Force could really do that would help is to train internally so that people are prepared and people aren't like, I'm sorry, you're a part of the SBIR program, like you're looking for an MOU. Like I don't know what you're asking for. Like you want to do an interview with end users for a technology. Like I don't know if I'm supposed to be talking to you, but like no, you should be, and you should be able to sign an MOU and have a template almost that you are ready to write and to sign for that company. Like training internally and having people be aware that there's these companies out there who have innovation that they can bring to you and how to play ball with those small businesses. I think that that's important.
That's great, Lauren. Yeah, you guys are all singing from the same hymn. So it's good feedback. So can you guys give us an example of a shining star, a company or an individual who made smart adjustments to increase success in the SBIR environment? Billy, I'm going to turn to you first on this one.
Sure, no, great question. Just met with them last week. While they're a new client to me, but they've been with the PTAC since 2017. Global Flight, their local company, they have really maneuvered in this space very smartly. They're very well positioned to move on throughout their phases. Really, really cool technology, but at the same time, just a very cognizant and well planned leadership there that really strikes you as really getting it. Quote unquote. So it was refreshing talking to them last week. I'm glad they're one of my newer clients, and it's going to be a lot of fun helping them find those different clients, to expand their reach with their technology. I'm really looking forward to it.
That's great, Billy. It sounds like they have the 4 topics that Brian hit on: customer, funding, planning, and leadership. So that's great.
Oh, completely. Yes.
Lauren, how about you, bud? Can you tell us about your shining star?
Oh yeah, this one was really hard actually to pick just one. I mean, we've worked with so many incredible companies like Nick Ripplinger from BattleSite and these other people who have these big successes under their belt. But I want to talk specifically about one woman in particular who Nikki and Brian both know, Lisa from a company called Currently. She came through a recent cohort of ours, the T3 Accelerator cohort, where she was involved with the 10-week program. We spent a lot of time with Elisa and her sensor. This technology was incredible. It was one of those things where you're like, really? Can it really do that? Like, no way. There's nothing on the market that can touch that. Like, are you sure? but she was right. And the things that she found out, the story she was able to craft going into her phase 2 proposal was incredible. And I'll say this too, is that we need more women like her to get involved with the SBIR program. This is non-dilutive capital that can help create businesses and generational wealth. And we need more diversity and more women who are willing to step into that and work hard to get access to some of this stuff, because it's a great resource out there for small businesses. And she's just one woman who hustled really hard to make contacts. She worked really hard, and she humbled herself to learn, and came in like a sponge from day one. I think she pulled all-nighters multiple times to like do extra work that was not even required, just because she wanted to learn and put herself in a position where she could succeed servicing the defense market. And that kind of person, man, that's a shining star, truly.
That's great, Lauren. Love to hear about companies like Currently. Brian, can you tell us about a shining star for you guys?
Yeah, I'll give a shout out to a client called Rocor. They're in the kind of Denver, Colorado area, and they focus on space products. And so Rocor started out kind of like many SBIR companies did, with some ideas and a couple of PhDs centered around, for example, space, composites and some thermal management solutions. And so they started off, again, like many SBIR companies do, with a variety of projects and a variety of different application areas and industries. And the pivot for them that occurred probably 5 or 6 years ago was, once they started to really get traction in the space world, they very quickly focused all the company's energies onto space. So they identified basically what I call a strategic product opportunity that was sort of this sort of served or unmet need in the marketplace. And they very quickly stopped chasing other SBIRs that didn't fit exactly within that vertical. They made strategic hires with industry, executives and experts. They partnered with companies. They did a really good job of developing strategic relationships, not just, hey, can I get a letter of support from Lockheed or Harris or whatever, but actually taking the time to develop deep relationships with those engineering teams, with the management teams, vice president, general manager level, and focusing all their resources and energy into space products. And once they did that, they very quickly discovered that, oh, we have this thermal group that also can develop some products for the space customers. So they identified more needs and applications within that area, but they sort of ignored everything else, all the shiny toys that might be in airborne radar applications or something like that. It just wasn't a fit. And so the reason they exited and was recently acquired just a month or so ago was because they carved out a very strong niche in that industry, became a go-to expert, had all the relationships and all the products that their customers were wanting. And so the biggest takeaway for me in doing this for 20 years now is that the companies that succeed, especially the ones that exit, at some point they become very, very focused, and they sort of shed away all the interesting projects they might do. And if it's not a strategic fit, they just ignore it. Even if it's an easy source of another $1 million of SBIR revenue, they don't chase it because they know it's going to be a distraction for their team. So really proud of the Rocor guys. They're an amazing group, and they've done it well.
That's great, Brian. Sounds like they made some strong business decisions, and that's not always an easy thing to do, to get rid of the shiny objects. So good for them.
Yeah.
So what I want to do next is kind of touch on some resources with this panel, since we have a strong group here. Where can people learn more? And this could be webinars, events, workshops. Just interested in how you would lead people. Billy, you have any thoughts on resources here?
The OUP TAC site has a lot of our upcoming events. We've obviously switched over to webinars and doing a lot of virtual events. Actually, the Ohio Business Matchmaker is going on right now, which is a great way to introduce yourself to 40 different potential government buyers. We had webinars leading up to that event, and we'll have a ton of educational webinars after. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the Collider events that Jim Masonbrink puts on at AFRL SB I mean, those are fantastic, and just a wealth of information from a ton of different perspectives that I think are really, really valuable. So those would be my top two.
Great, thanks, Billy. How about you, Brian?
Yeah, I think the Colliders are a great resource, and the webinars. We tend to participate a lot and steer our clients towards Air Force focused conferences. So Dayton Defense helps host Right Dialogue with Industry, for example. There's the Life Cycle Industry Days. There's the Armaments Symposium, typically in the November timeframe down at Eglin Air Force Base. Folks out at Kirtland Air Force Base and the Space World host one as well in the August timeframe. So there are a lot of, I'll call it Air Force centric. There's sort of the AIAA, it's national conference. It's kind of more big picture and abstract, but all those conferences have Air Force senior leaders, but also I'll call it, junior and mid-level program managers, researchers, and things like that you can connect with, network with, and really absorb a lot of information. So I would encourage people to attend those. Sometimes you have to travel and pay a fee, but to me, that's just, the cost of doing business to network and get smart. The one thing I would also say is that, having worked with AFWorks a bit, they use the Union VC platform. They've kind of carved out a little bit of a SBIR, community there. And I think platforms like that, and what that's kind of become is it's a place that AFWorks can communicate information to companies that are in the SBIR cohorts. But I see an awful lot of side discussions and people collaborating and asking questions and helping each other. And so companies network, they partner, and those kind of tools I think are also very valuable. I know Union VC, I think right now limited mostly to SBIR type companies, but if AFWorks or if someone like Wright Brothers or the PTAC could expand that community, I think those kind of resources are also very helpful, just to let people ask questions and share information and share, and help each other are very valuable.
That's great, Brian. Thank you. Lauren, how about you guys at the Entrepreneur Center?
Yeah, kind of the same thing, Nikki, of attending the right events, whether it's getting onto Union or Slack channels or whatever it is where people are having conversations, where events are being posted. For example, I know on LinkedIn, if you follow Anissa Lumpkin, she'll post certain things. The Wright Brothers Institute posts events and things. So going and liking people on Facebook or on LinkedIn and following them. I know the Entrepreneur Center, we do post a lot of opportunities as well. So I encourage you to go like us on Facebook or on LinkedIn, follow us there. We'll post opportunities to sign up for trainings and to go to certain events and things like that. So going and finding those people, following them, staying in tune with the services and opportunities that they're offering. I think that's a great place to start.
That's wonderful. In regard to resources again, what do you guys recommend companies or individuals do before starting with the SBIR process? Lauren, you want to tackle this one as well?
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. And it's a good question to ask, Nikki. I think, to not sound too cheesy, something my grandfather told me, he's a very successful entrepreneur when I was going into college, was success comes when preparation meets opportunity. I don't think he's the first one who ever said that. But he said it to me and it really struck me of like preparation and, meeting an opportunity is where success can happen. So the more that you can prepare before engaging with customers or engaging with the defense side of your business, I think the better. So write down what it is you're trying to accomplish. Like have a 30-second thing that you know in your head of what you're trying to do, because God forbid you get a meeting with someone and they're like, so tell me what you're trying to do. And you sit there and you're like, sell something to the Department of Defense, right? Like, no, like know what you're trying to say, like know what you're trying to do. It's never too early to start that planning process and to start jotting down how you think you're going to deploy your product, how you think you're going to go about, delivering your product, who you think you're going to target. Like it never hurts to start that process early. The earlier, the better. So that when you get that opportunity for a meeting, when you get that opportunity to interview someone, you've got the preparation that sets you up for success.
Gotcha. No, that's great, Lauren. Billy, how about you?
Yeah, I may be a little biased, but definitely contact your local PTAC. We're 100% grant funded resource to help you at no cost. But outside of that, take time to learn some of the language and protocol of your client. This is definitely a culture change from the commercial world or even from academia and research when doing business with the Air Force or some of these other government agencies. So, as a non-traditional or traditional company, it is important to know some of those nuances before entering the space in order to put your best foot forward.
That's great, Billy. How about you, Brian?
Yeah, I'll touch on things I think that Billy and Lauren touched on earlier and kind of previous. One would be aggressive networking. I think in this industry, just because it's so complex and there's so much to learn and know that, you don't have to learn it all yourselves. It's better to identify experts that can sort of help you out. So networking would be one. And then the other is, Lauren kind of touched on preparation. Really researching the area within the DoD or the Air Force that you're looking to target. So, I'll go back to, if you're looking to develop a capability for UAVs, really understanding the Air Force's missions and how UAVs fit into that, and then doing research and homework on all the different, not just combat missions and organizations, but also the support function. So who procures UAVs and what kind of solutions do they already have? And really just immersing yourself in the details of that particular area is so critical. It's amazing. I have a lot of friends still inside the government, and they'll often tell me how companies will set up meetings with them, and it's clear that the company has done very little research at all on that person's organization or their role or their needs or challenges, and they'll just essentially ask to be spoon-fed information, right? And so, being as connected and as smart as you can on that certain, I'll call it Air Force sector, is super important before you even start. You just need to know what you're getting into.
No, I think that's really good guidance, and I agree. So no, I appreciate all of your feedback on resources. What I'm going to do is change gears here a little bit, and before we wrap up the panel discussions, I'm going to field a few questions from our audience. And so I'm going to jump in first with one of the questions here. How do you suggest handling the significant lag time between the various SBIR phases? What steps should the company take to survive this? Brian, I'm going to turn to you first on this one. I know that you've been talking a little bit about the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 differences. And I think this question kind of jives with that.
Yeah, the lag time, I assume what they're really getting into is the funding gaps between those programs, which is a huge challenge.
Yes.
Yeah, I would say there's no easy answer there. I know the Air Force is making strides to shorten those gaps. It's made a lot of progress in the last couple of years. There's, I'm sure more to do. That's where it becomes critical, to be really honest, to identify commercial outlets for those services or products. And so maybe let me give you a quick example. We have a client that does advanced battery development and manufacturing, and what they did was they looked at and said, well, there's a lot of other people developing batteries as well. We actually happen to have a lot of test equipment. So I actually started contacting a lot of commercial customers or other DoD companies doing battery development and said, hey, do you have a need for outsourced testing? And it turns out a lot of did. So they actually developed a little bit of a side revenue using the in-house capabilities they had. And as they got into manufacturing, they were also able to offer prototyping services. So that has been, some revenue that's helped sort of smooth those gaps. The second thing I'll mention quickly is we've been having a lot more discussions with not just AFRL, but sort of end user customers, and highlighting the fact that those gaps exist and saying, hey, let's say Northrop Grumman might be a strategic partner. Well, we know there's going to be a couple month gap between a phase 1 and phase 2, but do you guys have 50K or 100K that you can maybe send to us, via IR&D funds or program funds that helps us maybe start the design of this product that's going to go into your application, or start a test matrix or whatever it might be, just something to help minimize the disruption. So asking your customers for gap funding is one key, and then also trying to identify commercial outlets, and it could be services that feed off your existing product development capabilities that you may not be aware of.
Gotcha. Brian, no, that's great. I appreciate that. So I would go on with questions a little bit further, but we're approaching our end time for our panel conversation. So please, if you're in the audience today, please feel free to reach out to any of the panelists with specific questions, or look at their organization exhibits in the exhibit hall and Socio. I'm sure they would love to talk with you. And I would like to thank all of the panelists and our viewers for joining us here today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Nikki. Appreciate the opportunity.